and welcome everyone to the Shitlord-preachers podcast. This is episode 30. For those of you joining us for the first time, this is Shitlord-preachers presented by Think Liberty, with a couple extra changes on top of that. Welcome everyone. My name is Amos Joseph. I'm joined today by Brook Potter, my co-host, as well as our special guest today, Killian Hobbs, the managing editor for Think Liberty, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. But real quick for everyone who's never heard of us before, Shitlord-preachers is based upon basically where Brook, myself, we're really good friends. Actually, funny enough, Brook, I saw a couple pictures of us in Thailand today and on the Facebook memory stuff.
Since 2012.
Yeah, you probably saw that too. There was that picture of us coming out of the back of the
van.
The van. Yeah. It was like this rap video intro look. Anyways, Brook and myself have known each other for quite a few years, and we started having conversations about politics where I wasn't so interested. Ever since kind of moving out of ministry, and he was moving out of ministry. But as we talked more, we realized why not make a show out of it about the conversations we have. And we started having these conversations, and now we're at 30 episodes, Brook. Where's the time gone?
I don't know, man, Amos. And for those listeners, Amos is quite right. Ironically, there's a lot of similarities between religion and politics, because politics has become the religion of the West in a lot of ways. Yeah. The same kind of cognitive dissonance and the inconsistencies and all the fallacies, that you could imagine. In fact, that's probably going to be my next video, discussing a couple of those that I've encountered. But 30 episodes, Amos, my goodness, we're really... And we've got a special guest for our 30th, right? So, this is huge, isn't it?
Yes. So, real quick, Killian, I guess introduce yourself quick, even though I kind of threw out a couple little bits there.
Yeah. So for everyone that's listening and or watching, my name is Killian Hobbs. I'm the former journalism director, editor-in-chief for Think Liberty. Now, under the new structuring, I'm the managing editor for Think Liberty, as well as the news editor. I take care of a bunch of the SEO stuff for the websites as sort of a side project that I'm working on with it right now. And I also host my own podcast, Coffee Shop Philosophy, that you can listen to on Thursdays. It was actually funny you mentioned the new religion in politics things, because the last episode I had was actually on the dogmatism in political discussion. Funny enough. Great.
There you go.
Like I say. But yeah, that's pretty much me. I just work a lot. That's kind of me. Yeah.
Now, real quick, Killian, I guess you're probably the best at explaining it. What is the new structuring with Think Liberty and our new, who we are now as Think Liberty?
Well, in a recent announcement that came out, I think it was, I want to say Wednesday or Thursday was when it came out. Basically what happened is Think Liberty, Being-libertarian, which is a major publication and currently the largest libertarian page on Facebook, funny enough. It actually has more followers than the LP itself, which I think is hilarious. Along with a South African publication by the name of Rational Standard. All three of us have come together and merged effectively to create one general consistent platform so that we're not all just competing with each other. We're one full platform with each other to promote liberty and to help out the liberty movement. So effectively the way it works, or the way it's going to work, is that Being Libertarian is still the flagship company. Think Libertarian, we've always been a Think Libertarian. That's kind of that's the Think Libertarian standard. That's the beautiful meshing right there. You see, I'm already thinking and coaching all three of them together at the same time. So this keeps happening to me. I'm an editor, by the way, so of course I get this stuff wrong. But looping back around, basically, Being Libertarian is the flagship. Think Liberty has always been a bit more of an edgier brand, I guess you could say. So we're willing to say some of the stuff that other places aren't necessarily willing to say. In addition, the Rational Standard, they're very focused on Africa as a whole, so they'll still be taking care of that side of things. So basically, Think Liberty is still going to cover all the podcasts that we've had. We're still going to cover the news roundups that we've done. I know Amos here does the South and East Asian news roundups for us, which have been great. We also have a Canada, a US, and a UK one right now. We're also going to deal with a lot of the lifestyle and action-driven stuff. So messaging, argumentation, actual candidates and things that are going on there. So a lot more active stuff. General philosophy and the like, general economics, like more of the broad scale stuff that's going to fit with being libertarian. And then anything that has to do with Africa, regardless of what kind of category it fits into, that sort of stuff is going to work through Rational Standard.
Awesome. Yeah. And for those of you who also are wondering, yeah, I am one of the writers now. So now Brooke and myself are bringing Shitlord-preachers over into the Being Libertarian multimedia department, where we'll be working with one of the guys there. Am I allowed to say who's the head guy for that?
Yeah, he's pretty well known. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows it's Eric July. Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone knows him. Anyone that knows Being Libertarian knows Eric July.
Right. Yeah. And so the podcast, I think, last I heard, Being Libertarian doesn't really have much of a podcasting branch, I guess. They've got videos and such, but there's no real podcasting. So that'll be
Sorry. Yeah, no, Think Liberty definitely has like a full network of podcasting, so that's going to be a major plus that we're going to be bringing over to the Being Libertarian side. I mean, it's all really exciting stuff, at least for people that get nerdy about corporate mergers and stuff like that, like me. I get excited by weird stuff, it seems.
Right. I mean, the combined reach that we're going to be having at this point is going to be, hundreds of thousands, if not more.
They have had pieces that have breached the millions mark as far as reach is concerned.
Awesome.
So a lot of people out there that are liberty loving that are going to find us.
Right. So yeah, we'll be basically. I like how you were saying Think Liberty is like the edgier brand. It's like, are we like the? It's like Being Libertarian is Buckle. And we're like the one real gothy brand that's like in there or something.
Yeah, really. Well, that's kind of always been our shtick is we're the guy that will, in one thread, will be just straight up shit posting. And then 5 minutes later, we're going to post an essay on why you're completely wrong about the market structures in the 1940s. We're those types of people. That's what Think Liberty is. We're smarter than you, and we can be assholes because of it.
We did just post a meme about stepsister libertarian porn.
Yeah.
While the profile picture for Think Liberty is Dr. Strange with the face of Hayek.
I love that pick. If Vinny Marshall is listening, he's the head on the Think Liberty side. He also does a lot of the shirt designs for the Think Liberty website. So if you ever go on the shop on Think Liberty, you'll see a whole bunch of shirt designs. He's done pretty much all of them. I still want that Dr. Strange Hayek as a shirt. So Vinny, if you're listening to this, and you damn well better be because this is on your network, then I want one of those shirts. I think I do enough. Get me one of those damn shirts. Make that shirt and give it to me.
Now, I want to get into it real quick just to touch on, I guess, your background with, like, how did you become a libertarian?
Well, it was a tooth and nail fight the whole way down, I guess you could say. Probably the best way to describe it. I guess when I was a little bit younger off, I'll go back to my first foray into politics itself. When I was on the younger side, I used to be involved with youth advisory committees. So these were advisory committees off of the municipal and regional governments. So basically it was to identify issues for at-risk youth, things that could be done in the community, planning community workshops, all that sort of stuff. So I started off with the municipal one as well as the regional one. Shortly, I became the chair of both. And I was with them for probably 7 or 8 years pretty much until I got too old to be involved, because it was kind of weird having a bunch of 13 and 14-year-olds first foraying into politics. And here I am, like 21, sitting around going, yeah, that's great. That was a little bit weird. So I did that for a fair bit. I also worked with an initiative called Friends of Milton Hospital. I ended up, me and the people involved ended up getting Citizen of the Year for 2009, I think it was, for getting stuff developed for advancing the local hospital by about 10 years or so. Originally, it wasn't going to be built up until about 2030, but our population had risen by about 100,000. So we pushed that in, and it's been fully expanded now. Politically, at the time, I was very, very pro-government and very what would be considered, I guess, almost state socialism. So I was much on board with, tax the rich, take that money, actually give it to the poor, get some sort of cycle going with people, and having the state facilitate it, because the state usually, if the people elected aren't, but then at the very least, they're going to employ people who are experts. Like the politicians themselves might not be experts, but you're assuming that if they're handing out $100,000 checks to everybody, that they're hiring experts. So that was the kind of basis that I worked off of.
Fucking state.
Oh yeah, no. Like I think current me would probably have kicked old me in the dick for the audacity that he had. And I mean, I don't get violent with my politics. I think that politics, it's something that, as important and impactful as it is in people's lives, it's worth discussing with a certain level of dispassion. You have to discuss things, even if there's emotional aspects to take into consideration. It still needs to be discussed on a very flat, logical level so that heads stay cool and you can actually get somewhere with your discourse. Otherwise, you just turn into, tribalistic shouting matches between either red versus blue. So there's no point in that, really. But it started to get more towards the libertarian side by actually entering into debates and testing these ideas that I had against other people. So I would come across arguments of how would this work, how would that work. There was viable options, but then I also had to look at my own consistent personal philosophy. So I had to say, okay, I'm supporting the state as a function of, I'd like to see this accomplished. I would like to see things work out better for the common man. I'd like to see things improve for the overall quality of life of just about everybody. So by taking that as the core philosophy and everything else being a branch off of it, I would argue those other branches against other people and see, where it would go, where it would lead. And quite a lot of the positions I'd previously held got trounced. And It's a good thing that they got trounced, because otherwise I'd still support them. I take the concept of being willing to change your mind very seriously, because there's no point in engaging in a debate if you have no intention of actually walking away from it, having gained something.
Agreed.
So over the course of, I'd probably say about a 3-year period, I found myself slowly moving down the political compass, as it were. I think the break point for me to switch from, I had gotten down to kind of a minarchist stance, but the break point for me switching from minarchist to anarchist was IP law. It was actually, I think, a 4-day debate back and forth when I finally gave in on the concept of IP law and had all my previous arguments for defending it trounced. So it was going through these. Yeah. So that was kind of one of the last things that I was holding out on as far as still supporting the state was concerned. And then again, for the betterment of everybody, it works out that capitalistic systems work better than socialistic systems. I mean, even a wingnut like Bono. I remember it was about a year or two ago. He went down to Africa and did a whole support thing there. But he came back and he said, "Yeah, when we kept on trying to help them, the money went nowhere. It got ate up and it was gone. When we set up infrastructure for them to create markets and help themselves, they flourished." So we're going to do that because apparently the shit we've been doing before was ideologically driven and not actually useful. So we're going to dump that shit. So, which was absolutely amazing to hear him say that. But not that I care about his opinion, but just seeing someone that invested in the other side flip was just like refreshing, because I was one of those people that was heavily invested in the other side and flipped, because that's what good debate and good conversation should do. It should lead to a change of ideas, and it should lead to people honing their ideas to something a little bit more true. Not to use a spooky word like that, but something a little bit closer to a truth.
No, definitely. Now, how did you come to become involved with Think Liberty?
Shit posting. So I knew a bunch of them, Vinny, Caitlin, some of the other some of the contributors, like Justin Skinner and a few others there. I knew all of them pretty much just through pages themselves. So I remember originally there was a different page. There was also a group, Gary Johnson's Dank Meme Stash, that was on Facebook that I somehow found my way into, and I started to get to know all these people through those. There's the Anarcho-Capitalist versus Minarchist debate group on Facebook, where I got to know them a little bit more, pretty much just connecting to people through different quasi-libertarian shitposting and debate groups. I got to know these people, and then eventually they put a posting out back in June asking for a new journalism director / editor-in-chief to take on the actual writing, scheduling of posts, building a team, all that sort of stuff. And I said, yeah, I can do that. So they reached out to me. I think a couple other people applied as well, but I was the only one that actually handed in a business plan along with my application for it. So I got the position, and I've been slaving over it ever since.
Yeah, you're definitely running quite a bit. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Would you say that, so you talk about the IP debate. Were there any like real aha moments, as we call them, like things that just totally blew your mind in hearing them? Do you remember those moments?
I do, actually. One of the big things that really caught me with IP, because I always looked at IP from the lens of the artist, because that's usually where people go with those types of arguments, is defending the artist.
Own your ideas.
Yeah, no one cares about defending the IP of Big Pharma. No one cares about defending the IP of Samsung or something like that, right? So the two main arguments for defending IP are protecting the artists and also incentivizing R&D, because a lot of people will say that if you create something and 5 minutes later someone else can go make the exact same thing, then what's the incentive for R&D? Those are usually the two key points. And like the good NPC I reiterated those points constantly. But when it comes to the artist, when it comes to the IP part with the artist, one thing that people forget when it comes to the record industry, this is something that I learned, and I had to research a bit just to make sure that whoever I was debating wasn't blowing smoke up my ass, because I always look up these cross-reference points to see if what's being said is true. IP doesn't help the artist. IP helps the record labels. Mm-hmm. IP helps the legal team. It helps their managers. It helps all those people, because the bulk of late-stage royalties that come through are not collected by the artists. They're collected by the record companies and all the other affiliates that are associated, that the money filters through first. I think it works out to something like 17% of royalties actually end up going back to the artist.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And even then, the bulk of their, like, some royalties catalogs are valuable. So the Michael Jackson catalog, the Beatles catalog, Rolling Stones catalog, those sets of recordings hold a lot of value. So there is money to be made out of those royalties. But outside of a handful of mega bands like that, for how often the older songs get used, the actual royalties amount to next to no money for some of these families. Almost all of the money they make off of touring. They make off of the initial sales of the albums. and they make off of nowadays streaming services. And then they bank that money, put it in investments, buy stocks, start restaurants, whatever else, and then they make that money that way thereafter. So looking at it, IP for the artists only helps the companies, which again, from my mindset, means nothing. If the companies can only exist and float because of what the government's doing for them, well, then they can fuck off. We shouldn't have these mechanisms in place to protect corporate powers.
That doesn't exist anymore, though, because there is no music industry. The big labels are gone. And really and truly, like the micro labels, the artists themselves are now producing their own label and producing their own music. So the Sony, I mean, Virgin Records doesn't exist anymore. Sony has a few big names, but what you're describing isn't the reality anymore. So, I mean, for the small guy, he owns the label. Would not intellectual property be useful for him?
Yes and no. And I would have to disagree slightly because there are still major record labels that are in play to this day.
Yeah, we still have some big ones, but it's not where it used to be.
A good chunk, it's nowhere near where it used to be, but a lot of those major record labels that are signing people still have control over the streaming services as well, even if they're not putting out actual records anymore, if they're just putting it out digitally. But it can help the artist to have that sense of IP in a sense. And I say in a sense just because look at how simplistic piracy is. How absolutely simplistic it is. It doesn't take a lot of effort or a lot of technical know-how to be able to get these songs for free anyway. And regardless of the actual, I'm trying to think of the right term here, the threat of force, the actual threat of force of state for having committed piracy or the fines or anything like that, outside of creating a website specifically for torrenting, those copyright laws don't really deter anybody from borrowing a DVD from somebody and burning a copy for themselves, or burning a copy of a CD when someone hands it over. I mean, people used to copy and bootleg tapes back in the day just to share it so one person would buy it and they'd share it amongst themselves.
No way.
Right? So, but the thing is, we still buy. We still want to support the artist and we still pay for them. I'll flip it into video games, for an example. If you look on Steam, they have a thing that they call the Greenlight Project. Now, I'll say this. Some of the stuff that comes through is garbage, and their management system needs some work. It's Valve. They need work always. But it gives you the opportunity to kind of buy in and buy pre-versions to help them finish the game and help them get that kind of revenue going, in which case it's entirely user-driven that they choose to give these people money. And I mean, nowadays, based on how streaming services and everything else work, why would you go through the effort of downloading a torrent client, finding a safe site, installing a VPN, finding a site that has the album that you want, installing it, relabeling? Why would you go through all that and then downloading the album art to go with it when you can just open Spotify and click play? You wouldn't go through those. You wouldn't go through those efforts anymore.
Yeah, but without the IP, Spotify could just say, "Well, we're going to play this for free. We'll take all the money, and you don't have to pay the artist," right? So I guess that's where the IP is important.
You see, I get that notion, but there's a flip side to it, right? You can have it where, like most of those sort of things, they get resolved via contracts anyway, because there's tons of free radio players that just play music out of people's personal libraries as it stands. So
but you still need a license to do that, though. I mean, a radio station could say they're playing that, but there's like a blanket, restaurants and stuff.
Actual radio stations do. I'm saying that there's dozens of them that don't actually follow any licensing. They just go ahead and play music because it's coming out of
radio stations.
Yeah, if it's coming out of their personal music library, there's different rules that go with that. That's why a whole bunch of people didn't get sued when MySpace existed and you could actually play music on your homepage.
Right.
The reason people didn't get sued back in those days, because if it's coming out of your own personal library, then there's no real restriction against playing it.
Sure.
Now, again, when it comes to the revenue for the artist, if we're looking to protect the artist, then streams are some revenue. which is always good to have some there. So you do run the risk of YouTube. That's another one where you do run some of the risk with that. But again, the majority of the money that comes in from artists is live performances and touring, as well as merchandise. Who's going to pirate No one's going to pirate a T-shirt. I mean, funny enough, someone tried to pirate a T-shirt version of one of the Think Liberty shirts where they tried to emulate the font, and it turned out terribly. You can go on Amazon, you find some seller that's not Think Liberty, and someone tried to rip off the Give Me Liberty or Death shirt, and it just looked god-awful because they couldn't nail the font we used, which was hilarious. Right. But at the same time, it puts that market option out there, and it gives people the choice to pick that version if they'd rather have that version.
Sure. But that's a different version, though.
Yeah,
if we're talking about the same thing, though.
Yeah, if we're talking about the same thing, right? If we're talking, let's say, specifically the music industry. Yeah. And I'll make one important note, which is if we're looking at IP law as a concept, then we need to look at it evenly across all industries. We can't look just into one industry.
Sure.
Because if we're going to apply the principles consistently across the board, then all of the other scenarios of IP need to be taken into consideration when we're weighing pros and cons.
Sure.
But again, the artists make the majority of their money off of touring. They make the majority of their money off of merchandise. And most of the money that comes back from streaming services or from record sales, again, usually get eaten up by management teams, by lawyers, by even smaller labels, by the record labels themselves. Unless it's a label that the artist set just for themselves and they're the only one on the label, the money doesn't find its way back to the artist.
But I mean, that is becoming the industry standard, where they own the label and all these things. So in that scenario, actually Tom Woods had, I assume you know who Tom Woods is.
Yeah.
He actually had a band that came up with the new model. And they said exactly what you're saying. You know, everybody's taking a cut, the managers, the lawyers, off the top, like before they even pay their taxes.
They're not just taking the cream of the crop, they're taking it down to this halfway through the stocks.
Yeah. And they have artists, like big names, that perform, do the live shows, and end up in debt because they got to pay all the staff. And so completely agree with you there. But the new model is, and I can't remember what the band was called, but they own the label, they own the catalogs as well. And, you know, they were a small band. They were building their stuff up over YouTube and stuff like that. For me, I mean, I'm not a big fan of huge corporations in that sense, but I would say intellectual property, to be able to say we own this music and own this catalog, it really affects them. So I don't know. How would you envision a person like that? If somebody could just take that music and they could do what they want with it, what would you suggest for them?
Well, there's a couple of options that I've seen that's come up. Using a platform like YouTube, for example, that can all be internally managed under content flow. Because a lot of, like a place like Spotify, for example, Spotify, you as the artist stream to it. Like you set up your RSS feed or anything else, and you're the one that uploads. It's not that Spotify themselves uploads to their service. Same as YouTube, same as... I think Apple Music is the only one where they get a little bit more peculiar with that sort of stuff. But for the most part, the users are the ones that upload the information. Now, what's interesting is an SEO perspective. Search engines despise repetition.
Yeah.
They absolutely despise seeing the exact same content posted over and over and over again, especially if it's coming from the same platform. So a platform like YouTube or a platform like Spotify would want to protect themselves by making sure that the same content isn't posted 70,000 times, and thus would internally create some sort of IP. So you wouldn't need a state engine to create the system. It would be done internally because the companies would want to protect their own interests of not having 10,000 versions of the same content. Another one that came up, this was on, I think it was the main Think Liberty podcast, I want to say episode 43 or something like that. They had me on because I was yelling and screaming about Orrin Hatch and how much of a prick he is. He had a law that came out that passed recently, Senate Bill 2823, that puts copyright on music all the way back to like 1920s and 1930s. So if it's digitally recorded, it's copyright protected now, whereas anything prior to 1972 was considered kind of done and over with, unless unless specific copyrights had been renewed. And all of these copyrights are now going to last until 2067.
Yeah, that's the Mickey Mouse laws.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. The Music Modernization Act.
No, I agree copyright should expire. I'm definitely, there's no reason Mickey Mouse has to have a 125-year copyright. That's ridiculous.
The flip side, though, like I was saying in that episode, one of the ideas that came up was the concept of a blockchain public registry. Because a lot of people that are buying into works of the artist, they want to support that artist. So they want to make sure that if they really like the music, that the money is going to go to that artist.
Right.
So in this case, what we see is you have some sort of public registry blockchain. So if you're the first person to create something, you simply add your tick on the box. And then if people want to know how to get to the source of what you've done so they can support you, they can check a public registry. So I think there's that option. There's a couple of options as well.
It's kind of like, you're going to donations, basically. You're basically saying that the music will end up being free, but you could do like a Patreon and you could do like, streaming revenue and other things. But the music is out there.
Well, I mean, that's where the majority of revenue is gone anyway. I mean, if you look at...
until the new model, until they own the record and they started to get a bigger chunk. But you're kind of writing that off.
Yeah, it's because, well, think of it that way, right? The only people that are going to be truly negatively affected by this are the ones that are your Katy Perrys that make $10 million because they wore a bright pink dress with like cone tits while singing in California.
Fair enough.
I'm sorry, I really don't care if that individual ends up short money if it means that everyone else is freer for it. It's the same thing like worrying about if Johnson & Johnson or Pavitzer, or however the fuck you say that company's name, worrying about the fact that they're not being able to afford their third yacht because we lost the IP law on the drugs that they sell so that we could save lives. It's kind of hard to feel bad for them.
I mean, that's I would agree with the big companies. The drug thing is because there is a huge cost to it. And I mean, this is something that I learned from a family member. She works in a government research facility. And would you not say that for a drug company, there is an incentive actually not to cure a disease? Oh, yeah. And her argument, and I happen to agree with her, is actually because she works with the VA and stuff like that. They actually have an incentive to cure the disease because it's government healthcare. Every VA person is costing them money. They want to get them out the door. So... any thoughts?
So when it comes to that sort of situation, it really comes down to who's going to be doing the work. Sure. So the current type of companies that we have are primarily profit driven, and they're trying to just keep the disease slightly away. They're not
manageable. Manage the disease. Yeah,
exactly. They're not trying to cure. They're not trying to get rid of it. They also refresh their copyrights on the drugs by changing one component by, 1 microgram per 1,000 parts, and then they put a name on it and they resell it. So they do a lot of this in order to continue staying in business, which again, I would say the IP law thing would fix that pretty quick, because at the very least, even if the drugs that are coming out are still in the form of just managing these conditions, market competition would make the prices plummet, especially depending on the cost of manufacturing, because everyone would want to get in on that market considering how necessary it is.
Right.
That said, let's say there's a drug that's made that almost cures something. Mm-hmm. Right? It almost cures something. It's close enough, not exactly, but there's enough there that if someone with some brain for biochemistry and a little bit of ingenuity could figure out how to make this cure a disease.
Right.
We get to that point. Right now with IP law, that is protected by the company. The information for how that pill works is classified and completely concealed. Whereas without IP law systems, people could just start reverse engineering all of these different drugs, and there's going to be people out there, maybe not all at once, but there's going to be people out there that figure out, hey, wait a minute, If we add 3 parts of this, 2 parts of this, pull out this part, we could actually just be done with this.
Mm-hmm.
Be done with
it. Are you saying that that's not known now? That
yeah.
I mean, they could figure that out. They may not be able to process it because of the IP laws, but the researchers, their stuff is published, and they're bouncing this stuff around. So what about the $1 billion the company spent to get the drug almost to a cure, and now you're going to give it away for free? What's going to happen to that company?
Well, for starters, it wouldn't be for free.
Right. Well,
some people may choose to be charitable, design it, spend all the money on it, and just hand it out for free if they felt that was.
And some do. Some drugs are like that.
There's I can't remember the name of the group, but there's actually a group of anarchist chemists that actually go around and create pirated versions of major drugs and sell them for cost. I forget the actual name. There's a group that does that right now that I think is brilliant. But if we're talking about the company, right? If we're talking about what happens to the company, there's a few things. One, let's consider who the company is. How did the company get to be as large as it is and as powerful as it is? What did it have to do for it to get there? Well, it needed continuous state support and interference and protections in order for it to grow to the state that it grew to. So if we're trying to rank a company like that as far as a victim is concerned, it's kind of hard to give them a lot of sympathy if something bad happens to them. It's sort of like saying,
right.
Let's take.
But they still spent $1 billion to create an almost cure. So are you saying just because they're a big company and the FDA has protected them, they should not make money on their product?
Oh, I think 100% they should make money on their product. However, because of the amount that the state has been involved in their existence, I think that we shouldn't feel any remorse for these companies when those state protections and involvements are removed.
Okay.
It's not like we shut down IP and then all of a sudden all of these companies are going to be ransacked and burnt to the ground and they're going to lose everything they've invested and spent. That obviously is not going to happen. But if we remove these state enforced protections, then they'll have to actually survive based on market forces. And a lot of the companies, just because of the amount that they already control, the amount that they have for the ability to produce, the doctor recognition of the brands, because obviously medical boards, even without an FDA, are still going to only accept drugs that they actually consider to be safe for their patients' consumption. So you could end up where a whole bunch of people come out and start creating actual cures or quasi-cures or something closer to a cure, and none of the doctors actually sign off or endorse any of them simply because it's not coming from a more validated source. That could happen as well. So it's not like I'm saying, go full anarchist and burn these things to the ground. They still spent money. They've still invested in the market. They've still advanced research and still improved the quality of lives of people that take a lot of their medications, aside from the fact that if you have a runny nose, that one of the side effects is suicidal thoughts and apparently for just about anything that comes out these days. But just by removing these mechanisms, all we're doing is saying, let them compete in a fair market. Let them compete without the state interfering with it and without the state stopping or controlling what their competition can look like. And I think that when it comes to the IP item, if we spread that out over every area that IP affects, we would see that as far as the consumer is concerned, and also for overall economic opportunities are concerned, because let's be frank, there's not a lot of room for some upstart to get into pharmaceuticals these days, unless they're just like a broker and they're a subseller of these other companies. If we allow market forces to take care of these things, then we can be consistent across the board with it and allow for the kind of growth that's going to come out of those market forces in play. There's going to be loss.
Sounds good.
There's going to be loss. There's going to be damages, stuff like that. not utopian. If you come across an anarcho-capitalist that is utopian, you can tell them to fuck off and leave my side. I don't want them. You're gone. So I go full Pinochet over bad ANCAPs far more than I do communists or socialists, because at least they're their own window of idea. Whereas there's just some people, it's just like, no, just get off my side. Stop agreeing with me. You're making us look bad. Please stop.
I mean, you and I Killian, you and I had this conversation over Facebook about the sort of the full on sort of these anarchists that kind of are pushing for the full on, just, I mean, collapsitarian, just tomorrow, the government disappears. And it's like,
don't do that.
Please, I get where you want, we see where you want, we see the utopia, but we know it's not just going to happen because you just, the state gets crushed tomorrow,
Yeah, pushing the Rothbard button makes no sense. I mean, even any anarcho-capitalist with some sort of, understanding of reality, any of them that aren't wearing the rose-tinted glasses are practically minarchists, because for the amount of state that needs to be repealed and the amount of things that need to be changed, because there also needs to be social changes that come with this as well. You can't just flip a switch and say, all right, it's a free market, go ahead. That's not going to work. People aren't going to know how to react. They're not going to be used to actually having to be responsible for themselves in a market setting. They're not going to be ready for that. It takes time for both the social side to change as well as the legal and governmental. So realistically, anyone that's alive today that's an anarcho-capitalist, unless a country burns down and somehow it ends up going that way, which is realistically unlikely, but somehow it ends up going that way, we're all practically minarchists as far as what we're going to see in our lives and what our goals should be. I mean, we want to be philosophically consistent. We want that end goal because that's where things should end if we're applying the same logic every step along the way. But the idea that we're going to get there, in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, or by burning the whole thing down it's ludicrous. It's not going to happen. Sorry to break some hearts out there, but it's not going to happen. It's better to work on what we can and move on.
Dang it. No, yeah, like I said, yeah, we had that conversation, and I'm starting to kind of come back to, people say, libertarian. I'm like, well, I'm a pragmatic libertarian. Like this, especially with the news of this caravan and the more conversations about immigration you're hearing. I got people sending me stuff about, how immigration, regardless, legal or illegal, is a great thing, and everything's just great. Just let them all in. And I'm like, I get where you're coming from, and I understand the principles at play, but we are still in a, we live in a society, and exactly, we live in a society, and it doesn't quite work so easily. I mean, I understood it when people were saying, yeah, we had the conversation, open versus closed border. Closed if there's a state.
Yeah. I mean, if we're looking at a repealing process for the state as a whole, because you can't, one thing that a lot of sides do, and this is where you run into the ideological inconsistencies that you see with hardcore Democrats, hardcore Republicans. Up here, you've got the Labour Party, the Conservatives, the NDP. Every country's parties run into this because they try to tackle every item individually rather than be some sort of philosophically consistent across all their ideas. Start with one principle and then apply that outward rather than a principle here, a principle there, an idea here, and then you end up with all this cognitive dissonance and all of these infighting with these ideas.
Pro-life, death penalty.
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what was another one that I saw that was really interesting? Pro-choice ban guns. That's another good example.
Yep.
People should be right to choose, except that has to be from a list of choices that I said you have.
Pro-choice, but still for the draft.
Yeah. Pro-life, but for the draft. But I guess looping it back over, when it comes to the borders thing, it's one of those items that it's the last thing that, if you're going to try to repeal the state, it's one of the last things that should come down. It's not something that should go first. Now, I understand that I get a lot of flack for this from other anarcho-capitalist types or even other libertarians in general. I understand the idea of having open borders for people to come into a country and buy land and have a place to live. And that sounds great, assuming that they come in, they buy land, they have their area, and that's where it works from there. I understand the same thing when it comes to, globalism with trade. There shouldn't be barrier restrictions and sanctions where the government says you're not allowed to do business with anyone from this square little set of land that we've decided are bad people. That I understand being against those, and from a philosophically consistent side, it makes sense to be against those types of restrictions. There was a video that came out not too long ago where it showed a solution to the border issue. And instead of it just being the United States border along the edge there, it was, Rick's house and Josie's house and Tom's house. And it broke down where the property barriers should be people's individual property. But right now the property is owned by the government. It's not owned by individuals, at least not all of it. So we have these public lands and we have the borders that are publicly owned, if you will. So yes, it's in the interest of a country to protect the property lines of the public, just the same as I would protect the property lines of my house. You would protect yours, et cetera, et cetera.
How status of you.
I know, right? It's when you apply the concepts such as defensive property, which is a more central concept to the capitalist side of anarcho-capitalism, is the defensive property. You've got to apply that principle consistently and evenly. And if you find areas where it looks like there's contention, that's when you have debate and you work through the idea and you try to get to which one makes more sense or which one's more right, if you will. In the case of public borders, the way I see it is, as long as we have public borders, public land, state interference, welfare state, et cetera, then yeah, there should be borders in place. Our goal should be to get rid of those and have it where it's all private individual borders. But we are absolutely nowhere near being that far ahead, especially considering we keep leaning more and more towards extra state rather than less state, election after election after election. And B, it's still a border. It's still a property line. If we believe in protecting property lines, then yes, we need to protect property lines. That would apply to a state's border, considering that the state has that property in public trust. It's one of those items where if we're going to get rid of these things, there needs to be a process for what you repeal when. The people that want to jump and make borders the first thing they get rid of are, I'm sorry to say it for those of you that are out there that actually like me, the 6 of you that are actually a fan of me. But if that's the thinking that you have, it's pie in the sky, pure ideology at that point, there's no realism to it. If you're going to dissolve aspects of the state, you start with things like superfluous laws, like can't loiter in an area for more than an hour, or there's a certain law on some roads where if you pass by the same spot in 6 hours, that's a ticket. There's a name for that apparently, but that's a law in a lot of places. You get rid of the stupid stuff like that. You get rid of the victimless crimes. You definitely ditch anything that looks remotely like social engineering. You get rid of all of those concepts, and then you can start digging into the deeper institutions and start adjusting society to replace those. But it's a project that takes time and investment and social and cultural change to make those things happen. And for the borders to go down, the state would have to go down. And you'd have to get rid of everything else first in a way where society can adjust. You gotta boil the frog, basically. You can't just throw them in. I've always liked that analogy. I don't know why. It always seems to fit, and people just immediately go, ah. That's probably the weirdest.
If borders are to be removed, I mean, I could just be like, yeah, if you really want borders removed, then let's remove the United States borders, not the U.S. borders, but the borders between the states.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you have internal borders, but how do you have internal borders and people want there to be individual state rights? Like, in a lot of libertarian circles, you'll see arguments for state rights, so that the states don't have to bow down to the federal, and they want these borders on states. But then, they want to do national borders. I mean,
they're at least practical in that sense. Yeah. Like the thing is, they're at least they'll show their pragmatism when they're talking about states' rights and sort of bringing the government down to a lower level. Like any way you can bring it a lower level is a good step. Bringing it down to more states' rights, and then but then once you're talking about immigration, illegal or otherwise, they start thinking, oh, no borders then.
Yeah, it's like I always find it funny when it comes to the topic of pragmatism, because there's so many people that argue against being pragmatic that base a ton of their arguments on the pragmatic aspects. One of my favorites for that are people that will argue against pragmatism and say that you shouldn't have a pragmatic approach. It should be ideological. You should be consistent on this. That's where the focus should be. We should stand by our principles. And these people are anarchists, and they will immediately jump to the Second Amendment as a defense of their gun rights. So they don't go to natural right theory or social evolutionist theory or anything else like that to defend their right to own a product. They jump to a government document. And they make an argument from the government document that came from the same government that they want to see abolished. I mean, pick. It's a generic sarcastic remark everyone does on Facebook. List two ideas. Pick one. That's you can't be purely ideological and then use a pragmatic argument like that. It makes no sense.
Yeah, they want to be ideologically consistent, and they think it's supposed to be applied in every aspect of their life. And yet, I mean, obviously all of us, but we all want to be anarcho-capitalists, but we're still in a very statist world. And we still work jobs and pay taxes. And as much as we want to go and spout off, taxation is, extortion and all this stuff.
Thank you for using it.
Got to. We still have.
I use that one too. That's right. There we go.
That was another thing. We talked about the NPC meme of taxation as theft, and there's like Facebook groups we have for Think Liberty, and I just posted in, is taxation theft? And then people are like, wait, you start to see like, okay, I mean, it sucks, but there are there are libertarian NPCs, and they're just like, wait, what was he getting at? Why is he asking this? Of course it is. And it's like, then you had someone like Killian hop in and go, well, it's extortion really. And then it's like, someone gets it.
Yeah, it's not theft, because theft as we define it is a legal term where the government basically, because they tell themselves that they're okay with stealing from people, that they can get away with it because it's not theft at that point. We use theft as a legal term. It's extortion because the mechanics of it are exactly the same as an extortion racket, because they offer protection, they offer services, so on and so forth, and then they forcibly come and collect from us. It's the same idea.
I mean,
I actually, go ahead, Amos.
I was going to say the IRS, and if you guys have watched like any sort of mafia show, any mob boss coming in, it's kind of hard when you really break down in the terms of the principle of the thing. Hey, you pay your share. and won't be any problems.
It's the price you pay to live in Little Sicily.
Civilized society, asterisks.
Yeah, exactly. Going to the NPC thing, I always loved that one. What was it there? Not left, not right, just free.exe.
You might have to explain that a little bit for the younger audience who actually don't remember like extensions and stuff like that.
Yeah, really. Oof.
So basically, .exe
I can add to your computer.
Yeah, it's basically just an execution, which is what the evil Windows computers use. But yeah, execution was like an extension you'd have on the end of a file, like
Windows.exe or
Windows.exe. Yeah, you had all this stuff, so it's kind of a script for executing some sort of action on a computer, if anyone is wondering. But yeah, the NPC meme, not left, not right, just free.exe. Like, or people would actually write out like a line of actual code, like with like really nerding out. So
I remember one of the guys we talked to from the Being Libertarian side, a guy by the name of Alan. I remember there was a whole thing where one of them came out and he actually does a whole bunch of server work. So he was just picking it apart piece by piece. He's like, well, this would create an error. This would create a syntax error. You got to fix this. You got to change, like, it's doing like 20 minutes correcting the code in this meme so it could actually operate. I love that level of detail. I gotta love that level of detail. Like, I'm not even mad. I'm just impressed.
That's commitment.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I actually reference you referencing that article, Killian, from your NPC meme episode where you talked about the inner dialogue. Mm-hmm. And I brought that up with people, and they were surprised. It's like, yeah, like it's weird to think about 80% of the population literally goes throughout their day not really thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably more than that.
It's terrifying is the word you're looking for.
Like, I mean, there's will, to act, but there's no like thinking. Like, it's a script,
like they're acting and they're moving and they're speaking based on internal ideas, but they're not actually having that kind of conversation about it. They're not actually
aware,
thinking about what these actions are going to be or what they're going to do. It's just more of a feeling about how they're going to do it, and then
preconditioned response.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about. I don't know if you saw the recent interview with the Jordan-Peterson, but the interviewer is a British woman. I think her name was Helen Lewis, and she is the definition of NPC. Right. I mean, she's writing a book about feminism and she's towing the line on, the oppressive patriarchy and stuff like that. And it was very impressive to watch Jordan-Peterson basically poke fun at her. And he did like a 5-minute speech in this where he's like, because you've said these things, these particular things, I now know your position on pretty much most things. Because you haven't really given an original idea. You haven't presented yourself. You've just repeated these ideologies that have been imposed upon you. And it's not even a good mix. It's not like something personal and an idea and you've blended it to create something new. You're just espousing rhetoric, which means you're not even here right now. You're not even engaged in a real conversation. It was brilliant. It was, I encourage anybody who might want to see it. We'll probably put links, afterwards. But that's what we're up against. This continuous rhetoric.
So what you're saying is,
right? That's Kathy Newman, which is another British interviewee. The British aren't looking very good right now.
Do they ever? But no, it reminds me. A lot of people forget this because everyone thinks that Jordan-Peterson is just a generic shitposting intellect. People forget what his actual background is. He's a professor of psychology by trade. Like the whole reason he got in, the reason he became famous was because he said, no, I'm not going to use your pronoun because how you feel about it isn't going to direct my actions. You don't have that power over me. But what really got him into this vein was he wrote a few actual papers, published papers on the mindset of SJWs, on what the actual psychological profiling of the type of people that take on these stances, how they pool their ideas, the kind of cognitive dissonance and double think that's involved in making their ideas work, and also the tribalistic aspect and, frankly, the victim Olympic aspect.
Yes.
So he goes through the psychology behind these in a very clinical, hard to argue kind of way, and that's what kind of cemented him as the anti-SJW intellectual. There's one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I really think people should pay a little more attention to him. It's another Canadian. People forget that Jordan-Peterson is Canadian, and I love telling people that because it just throws them for a loop. But a guy by the name of Gad Saad.
I thought it was Saeed, but yeah, it's Saad, yeah.
Might be Saeed. I think Saeed is with like the Y.
I don't know if you saw, he did a whole thing. What was it? The monk debate or whatever it was called, with that it was Peterson and 3 other people.
I know it was Peterson and Stephen Fry for the pro free speech, I forget the
anti-PC.
Yeah, it was on. It's hard to find on the Monk Debate site, but if you go to C-SPAN, they host streams of all of it. You can rewatch them there. Monk Debate actually just had the David Frum and Stephen Bannon debate about populism. That was actually a pretty interesting watch. A lot of rhetoric rather than debate, but it's entertaining at least.
But you were saying about, you're right, it is sad. Gad Saad. What stood out with him for you?
I just like the way that he applies his ideas consistently. He doesn't just take the contrarian approach for the sake of taking the contrarian approach. I mean, he's contrarian on a lot of things just because of kind of where the Overton window has shifted culturally. But he's consistent in the way he applies it, and he does it with a smirk. And I think that's probably... that's basically the definition of what we do over at Think Liberty. We're right with a smirk. So it's just that attitude has always just vibed with me. I always like that.
Yeah, it's been really good because he's Lebanese by descent, I believe, right? So a lot of the left think, he's like a brown person and he should be spewing these ideas.
Yeah.
He's just outside the box for a lot of them,
Yeah. Yeah, it always... I would love that. As much as I hate editorial cartoons, I find that some of them are just like terrible, and there's just words, like they'd write the words everywhere to just label every single portion, like the audience is completely moronic. Which I assume if you're passionate and enjoy editorial cartoons, that maybe they're not wrong. But there was one about the Kanye thing with him running off of the plantation. And
really?
Yeah, it was the Democrat plantation, and it showed Kanye running off and the Democrat donkey chasing after him to try to get him back on the plantation. And I think that there's an unfortunate amount of truth in that, where the left have this idea that they, by default, own the votes and supports of anyone that's any form of minority. And that ideas that are capitalistic or
individual responsibility,
that has to be like a straight white male thing. It can't be anything else. If you are in any group that is considered marginalized, you have to be on the left. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you. I mean, it was something that came up in this came up on CNN. So if YouTube causes any problems for this live stream, I'm quoting CNN. And the person reviewing this can know that I'm quoting CNN, and whatever the moderator is can do rude things to themselves. I don't care. I'm not going to go into detail, but yes. During a panel about Kanye's meeting with Trump, they were saying things like, "This is what happens when Negroes don't read."
I know we quoted that. We talked about that before.
Like, imagine anyone else saying that. Imagine anyone else saying that. Imagine if, let's say,
Fox News.
Tucker Carlson. Yeah, that's what I was trying to find. I was trying to remember the name. Imagine if Tucker Carlson came out and said that at any point during the Obama presidency to describe something Obama did.
It would be mayhem.
Fox would be dropped by the cable companies, like by all of the service providers at that point. If he said it. And they kept making commentary like this. And the idea is that, well, they're referring to him just as the black man that he is, so they're not being racist. It's like, no, you've got your tribal lenses on. If anyone else in any other situation were to use this exact same terminology, your back would be up. The only reason it's not is because of who's doing it. Because it's this side that's doing it.
Yeah, it's my side, so yeah exactly.
Honestly, I'd say, there's still a lot of stuff to deal with as far as, race issues and everything else in just about everywhere in the world is concerned. There's still a lot of, tensions that come out of that and all that sort of stuff. But really the most dangerous tribal divides we have are ideological. Hands down, I would say that as far as actual damage that causes to people, to lives, and to any form of unity inside of a country, it's the ideological divides that have become the most dangerous. Ideological differences on their own aren't dangerous, but we tribalize them to the point where we see literal clashes in the street over whose NPC response is better, who's got better coding.
I mean, the irony of the situation, especially in North America. So I'm in the UK. I didn't actually mention that before, but I mean, a conversation I had with somebody recently was, okay, the Obama presidency, of course, was, it was groundbreaking and stuff like that. And we were having a discussion about race relations and other things. And I simply asked them, I said, do you remember if before Obama, race relations were probably as tense as they are in the US, as it appears to be now? And it sent them for a loop, right? Because they honestly had to say, well, no, they don't remember having these types of race conversations 8-10 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, that's the Democrat, right? That's the Democrat who's, supposed to be all for minorities and all for, inclusion and all this other kind of stuff. But they played into it so well that they're using it to divide us and stuff like that. And again, that's that doublespeak. So the cognitive dissonance is into that whole thing.
There's an interesting bit of history with that, actually. I mean, if you look back, let's use the United States history for it, just because I'm assuming that the majority of the audience is probably going to be American that's watching this, or it's on the RSS feeds, whatever else. But the States has a long history of racial issues, obviously. A long history of divide. There's a lot of systemic issues in the foreground that America was built on. But then you get into late 70s, mid 80s, the 90s, early 2000s, and you don't see there being that large of a divide during those time periods. I mean, imagine trying to release Blazing Saddles now.
You can't.
It just couldn't happen. But at the time, it was looked at almost as a form of unity. It was nobody involved actually cares. We're just going to have a laugh with this because at this point, that's all that you should be doing with racial divides is laughing at them.
Correct.
We shouldn't be living them. We shouldn't be embodying them. We shouldn't be stressing them and trying to make these differences that much more defined, that much heavier.
Pronounced.
The idea is to... Thank you. That was actually the word I was looking for. I just could not remember it. I'm an editor. I speak one language and I fuck it up constantly. Anyway, when we're trying to have these different divides, or we're trying to eliminate these divides, I should say, overstressing the differences is not the way to do it. It doesn't work. It lends itself to people putting themselves inside of small little tribes with each other, and that's about it. I mean, take a look at, I'll use Canada. Canada uses the mosaic approach to multiculturalism, whereas America uses the melting pot approach. If you're an American, you are an American, period, end, full stop. That's the way it's treated. You're an American before you are whatever other origins you have. That's the idea of their multiculturalism. Canada uses the mosaic model, which is to say that everyone should retain their uniqueness, retain their culture. There shouldn't be interferences with it, so on and so forth. And between the two, there's pros and cons for both ideas as far as how it affects society. But I mean, in Canada, we've got half of a city is entirely Polish. An area in Toronto is entirely Greek. Another one is entirely Indian. Another part is entirely Pakistani. And you see people naturally closing themselves off into these little tribalistic areas. So you almost have many tribal states inside of the country. And I mean, you see that inside of major cities just because of the way that people migrate and move around. I mean, you wouldn't have a Little Sicily or a Chinatown if people didn't naturally do those sorts of things.
Correct.
But it's not like they're putting up actual borders and stopping people from interacting with each other and mingling with each other and getting to know their neighbors and getting outside of their close-knit little tribes at that point. Whereas with all the focus that we're putting on it, people's defenses, they're going to want to stay more to their tribe and stay inside of this area that they've been designated to be a part of, because people like being a part of something. There's a real trick psychology that's being played upon that's actually causing more divide by trying to highlight how positive each individual distinct group is.
Correct. And I mean, for us, especially in London, because the amount of what would be considered like white British is now a minority in the capital city. We see the divisions. We see, a lot of these cultures that are coming here, they're bringing their violence and their ways and stuff like that. Like we have a huge Congolese population here. And I mean, young kids are seen with war and they've seen people massacred and stuff like that. Violence is just a way of life. Mm-hmm. And they're coming over here and they think, not punching somebody is like toning it down, and just using the machete in extreme cases is like, toning it down. But they're not, that's just their culture. And unfortunately, if that type of thing worked, like if the full, letting people have their own enclaves and stuff like that really worked, there wouldn't be so much conflict around the world, right? Like Brazil should be like the biggest melting pot and should be like a utopian, fantastic place. And it's full of conflict. It's one of the most violent places on the planet,
They just elected practically a literal fascist in order to try to fix things.
Exactly. I mean,
it always reminds me of that. It's a stupid meme, but it's unfortunately accurate. The hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times.
That's right.
That's unfortunately a pretty accurate historical cycle if you look at just about every country.
Yeah, I mean, Amos did that whole video about decadence, so I mean, probably, yeah, you could speak about that.
Huh? Oh.
Thanks for tuning.
Welcome back, Amos.
No, I did not. Sorry. I'm just listening to the two of you because it's getting.
You mentioned the UK. I mentioned Canada. He tuned out because he's an American.
Can't find it on the map.
We are the Commonwealth that got away.
Yeah, we want our colonies back.
No, I mean, you look at your different cycles. It's been a while since I've looked into it, but basically, we're kind of reaching this point in the, at least in the States, just the Western world in general, of decadence, where basically, I call it societal boredom. where everything is going so well that we start to sort of look back on ourselves and try to pluck at all the negative things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every if you want to say it's like what is it? Like it's this huge. What is the term? Not a blanket. Those things that you like that old ladies get together and sew together.
A quilt.
Yeah, I'm like, what's the word?
Thank God you're not an editor.
No, I'm just the writer. He's the editor. So they arrange these quilts. Well, quilts are they look pretty nice and all, but if you look closely, there's still going to be threads that kind of stick out. There's you get clothes sometimes. You get a thread. Where you told never pull on it. Well, now we have some, America and just Western culture in general has such a, beautiful quilt with different cultures, obviously, and all these different things and different ideas. And you have the society starts to get to basically question itself and starts to go, well, we need to pull this thread out. Well, I need to pull that thread out. And next thing you know, the quilt is starting to come apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then but then instead of pulling at threads, they'll pull at threads. They see some more threads. So they start to see, oh crap, like they pull the thread of, sort of what I kind of call like inherent just tribalism. Oh, we're obviously tribal people. Humans are tribal regardless of where we are. Some more, some less than others, but they'll just go, oh, like some people are racist. Well, that's just a fact. People are racist. So they pull on that thread, then they start going, and then all these other things start to unravel, and they start seeing, all these other racist things, and then all the KKK still exists in the U.S., or this still exists in the U.S., and all these other things. Next thing you know, they're just tearing out whole pieces of the quilt, and they're not just taking the problems with, but they're also taking all these other things that are tied to that might be positive. You have your positive things, but they're going to be tied to some negative things in your society. If let's say, so on one hand you have free market capitalism, on the other hand you have greed and corporatism. So you pull the greed and corporatism thread, you can tweak. It's better to tinker with it, but you pull it. Next thing you know, there goes capitalism. Just because you want to pull the whole thing apart,
I mean, a good example of that would be ditching chivalry because it's sexist.
Exactly.
Yeah, you see like misogyny in groups of men. You start pulling at that thread, and then you start to go, oh wait, but it's tied to like this other stuff here, and we're going to pull this stuff here, and then we're going to let's just burn the whole thing. It's like wait.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I always find weird because. I mean, you touched on it pretty strongly there by just saying that, people societally get bored. So they try to find problems that don't actually exist because there hasn't been a real fight culturally for, well, the West in general since the early 90s when people started to accept the LGBT movement. That was kind of the last major... I mean, there were still things left to do, like legalization, gay marriage, whatever else have you. But as far as just acceptance that people exist, that was the last big fight.
Yeah.
And there hasn't really been one since for people to worry about. So we kind of create these problems or magnify things that were never problems just to have something to fight.
It's sort of a macro example of individuals. So like, if you take if a person who's like for example, like with you, Killian, if you said you're kind of a workaholic, if you were able to not have to worry about money and not have to work, you'd probably go insane after a while.
Oh yeah, if I was in a place where I didn't have to worry about money, I would take all that money, reinvest it, and start managing more businesses and just keep working.
Keep working, yeah. But I mean, in general, humans require they need to be doing something. Whether it's being, the corporate drone of sitting in a cubicle all day or working, or actually working, whatever job they do, and they keep wanting to, have that time and energy to not have to work, But once they reach that, you're going to go nuts. So in the same way, now that we've had so much given to us as a society, so much, that we don't have to quote unquote work as much, we're going mad. And, like I said, the societal boredom, and we've talked, Brooke and I've talked about kind of what has happened with previous civilizations, great civilizations, that basically got to the point where let the barbarians in.
Spiced it up.
Yeah, because they were because they got to the point where things are going so great for us, and there's always going to be, until some utopian future that I don't know if we'll ever reach, there's going to be a disparity in the world between some countries and other countries. And again, it ties back to our borders, talk. You open your borders, you let people in that just don't really jive with your society, with your morals, the way your customs. And next thing you know, Western civilization is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least severely crippled,
People used to forget that Istanbul had a different name.
Yeah. People forget how much the Greeks and the Romans really did. And they try to go, well, we don't know why they disappeared. Well, lots of reasons, but it really just comes down to, hey, things are going so great. Let's try to make it even better. And, I've talked about this, and I said the only thing that would really get us back on any real track is if we a space race or aliens. Something, a world war is just not going to happen, at least as far as I'm understanding it. It's not really a viable option. So it really comes down to, we need the real externality that would push us back to sort of keeping society occupied with advancing ourselves would be some sort of a challenge.
Well, you know what it's going to be, right?
What?
It's going to be when we finally colonize Mars. Mars is going to want independence from the Earth, and there's going to be factions that come out of it, and Earth and Mars are basically going to fight for a couple hundred years. That's where we're headed.
What about the moon?
Yeah, maybe the moon might get into this, man. But
they'll be Switzerland. They'll hold the wallets.
Some philosopher actually kind of said that's kind of where we're going, because like you say, if once democracy comes into play, you don't get a lot of war. War tends to need a dictator or some kind of something. So as democracy has kind of taken root around the world, conflict has kind of at least global conflict has disappeared. You have civil strife and other things like that, and that's religious, Sudan and other places. But it's
good old-fashioned American interventionism.
Right. You get that, because it's politics. They're trying to hold off Iran and all that kind of nonsense. But it's going to be something. It's going to be something like that. And this philosopher said, well, in 100 years, it's going to be the Earth versus Mars, and they're going to fight for 100 years because they have to circle around each other to meet because of the orbits and stuff like that. And he says it's going to be the greatest conflict and, all that kind of stuff. And that's a reflection.
War fought for 5 days.
Yeah, you fight every couple of years and then you go back to life. You rebuild.
We're going to build a space elevator.
It's going to be the greatest elevator.
We're going to make the Martians pay for it.
Oh, shit.
If anyone who's listening, I was just doing the Trump hand gesture and my horrible Trump impersonation.
Bigly.
But yeah, that's kind of where we're headed. I mean, provided we don't cripple ourselves in the process of this sort of PC, gone wild as it already has. But I mean, because now we're actually falling backwards. Now, I mean, the U.S. is the last stronghold for free speech. Where the ACLU is literally suggesting some censorship is okay. The group that brought forth all these, brought forth, rules, and, what is it, amendments and certain laws that have basically brought us civil rights, now is turning back on one of the most fundamental ones, if not probably the most fundamental one, I think it is, in the U.S.
It's like they forget that it was that right that allowed them to do everything else they've done.
Yeah. Without that, you don't have Western civilization. Because you can't reason, you can't debate. Yeah.
I think we're only one of I've heard, some more right-wing people would say we're the only country with free speech. Is there anyone else with even close to the amount of free speech we have?
I'm not sure. I'll have to look at Switzerland, but I'm not sure. I think you're the only country that has a constitutional amendment guaranteeing free speech. There might be some common law stuff, like parliamentary.
Mm-hmm. Somalia.
Well, that's because they have no functioning government. That's a different story.
I can say whatever I want in Somalia.
Funny enough, I think some Middle Eastern countries would actually probably rank pretty high on that, as weird as that sounds.
Interesting.
Because their only things are, don't say anything against the royals, don't say anything against the Quran and associated figures and beliefs.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's pretty open. Other than, of course, how much women are allowed to say and do. But
hey, they can drive. Okay.
If we're talking about use of terms, use of words, speech police, you see in Western countries now, they don't really have that outside of those very specific larger topics.
That's
interesting.
No one's going to stone you. No one's going to stone you for death for using the wrong pronoun.
Well, not yet. Let's hope. Because I mean, the people who are espousing this thing do seem to have a sick fascination with Islam, and they don't. I don't think they necessarily understand it, but they have definitely a soft spot for it. Where recently, the European Court of Justice basically sided with blasphemy laws, saying that anybody who criticized Islam, they should be in prison. And a European woman made that statement that she thought that Muhammad was involved with little children. Might be a historical fact from some of the records. And just by saying that, she was brought up on charges, and she took it to the High Court, and they sustained that.
It reminds me of the so Killian, you saw this meme earlier today. The speaking to a left-wing activist.
I was just about to say that.
It's like a chart of interest level, and it goes, would you like to protest against rape culture, homophobia, and sexism within Muslim culture? And it just drops off.
Oh, fuck. So
this weird alliance between the left and Islam is confusing.
It's not necessarily an alliance, it's a sympathy for Islam, that Islam gets a pass. Not too many of them are going to join Islam, but yeah, Islam has a lot of free reign.
Like the videos of these feminist protesters, chanting, Allah Akbar and all that stuff. Now that the NSA has joined us already.
Well, they were with us since Killian came on, man. Get real.
They're like, no, he's Canadian. You got to watch him. But yeah, there was that video, I don't know if you guys saw, where they had these feminist protesters, like someone with there was a woman with a megaphone basically chanting
Linda Sarsour.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
and like these women are like crying and like holding up their feminist, signs. I'm like, the hell's going on here? Like,
I swear it's a brain syphilis. It's got to be.
Brain syphilis. That's definitely a way to explain it.
That is Brooks' equivalent to cancer.
Yeah.
So we are coming up on our time here. Was there anything else that you wanted to add, Killian? Any other cool stuff coming up with Coffee Shop Philosophy or with our Think Liberty, I guess, since you're the guy?
Well, I'd probably say always check into the website there, think-liberty.com, to see the weekly different news roundups, as well as my podcast on Thursdays and my Bad Argument series of articles that I do on Wednesdays. As far as just kind of content coming up for the new Coffee Shop Philosophy, I'll keep that under wraps. If you're actually interested, you can come actually watch it, or listen to it, I should say. Otherwise, just we've got two other websites that we're all affiliated with now, all of which are going to have some great content. So if you're liberty-minded, there's a ton out there for you to read, listen to, and enjoy. And the memes. There's tons of memes. The memes are great.
Anything you wanted to add, Brooke?
No, I'll just say happy Guy Fawkes Day. For those of you who don't know, Guy Fawkes, November the 5th.
Remember the 5th of November.
The 5th of November. He was the last guy to walk into Parliament with honest intentions of blowing it up. So, yes, today is that day. That's why I keep pausing it, because there are fireworks going on around me.
One little thing I'll throw in that I always find funny with Guy Fawkes is people support him as this kind of like individual anarchist figure when he wanted to blow up Parliament to help establish a Catholic theocracy. And there's just something that's really ironic about that, and I think it just fits beautifully with everything else we discussed today.
There we go. Like, happy Guy Fawkes Day.
It's like us libertarians and right wingers with Pinochet and a helicopter. We play that.
Fascist.
Yeah, we're like throwing commies out of helicopters. We're like, yeah, but then we're like, he was a fascist, guys.
NAP doesn't apply to communists.
But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today on the Shitlord Preachers podcast. This was the 30th episode. Follow Killian here. What's your handle on Twitter there? I know you're not on there much, but who are you on Twitter?
That's a good question. I'm not on there that much. I think he actually tagged me in the chat there. I think it's just at Killian Hobbs. Where you can find me on there.
Follow him on Twitter, as well as check out his articles on Think Liberty, as well as go to, of course, think-liberty.com for all the articles there. And follow myself and Brooke on Twitter. I'm at Amos Joe. Brooke is at Brook_Potter. As well as subscribe to our channel. Check out previous ones, even the ones, for those of you who are coming through Think Liberty. We do have episodes before we came on Think Liberty, so check those out. Subscribe to the channel, comment below, let us know what you guys think, and we will see everyone next week on Monday, 11 o'clock Central.